Friends, welcome to the California Republic, more specifically the California Redwoods. We are here to drive something not from California, but rather von Deutschland. The 2017 Porsche Carrera S. Well, actually, we're going to drive the Carrera S, but we're also going to talk about the Carrera, the base car. And it's going to have a manual transmission, so very excited about that. So why don't you and I go through a tech review while we work on the full first drive review. And let's start where we always start, the engine. Yeah, the engine. Okay, so about that engine, that's really kind of the biggest deal going on here. And this is where we have a lot to cover, so get your notebooks out. If you are a Porsche fanboy, you definitely know there's a lot going on here, especially in the Porsche world, because it's not just this car. Effectively, Porsche is trying to improve their overall corporate average fuel economy for the US, as well as their CO2 emissions for the rest of the world, because frankly that has a huge bearing on a car being sold in different markets. So here, Porsche has reduced the size of the engine, and they've added two turbos in the coming 718, which will drive, same situation there, but they've actually thrown out two cylinders, but we'll come to that probably in a couple of months. But here, what's happened? They've basically taken the flat six, which you and I have loved for, what, 52 years, and thrown it in the trash bin. So they've taken this and they've put it down to just under 3 liters. Why 3 liters? Well, that skates a number of tax schemes in different regions of the world. Now, in doing so, you would think that would lower the output. Actually, it didn't, and that's where the two turbos come in. So the base car, the Carrera, puts out 370 horsepower, but really you and I are interested in torque. So that's 331 pound-feet of torque. And what's really important with that is torque out of a flat 4 or a flat 6 engine. That's something that's difficult. That's something that you need to rev the engine very high to get any torque out of. Well, here, by adding in the turbo and playing around with the ECU, they've been able to get that 331 at 1700 RPM, and it stays flat all the way up to 5,000 RPM. So we're okay on the Carrera now. Now let's move on to the Carrera S, which this car is. This one is 420 horsepower, but the torque goes to 368. Now, like the base car, the torque comes in at 1700 RPM and stays flat to the engine speed of 5,000 RPM. Okay, that's, again, all fine and good, but what's really happening here and how they get to that? Well, number one, the block is completely different. It's actually lighter by 3.3 pounds. It's formulated with a different aluminum, but it has steel cylinder liners. And then the turbos themselves, that's where we get to some of the bigger changes. The actual turbo housing, whether it's the Carrera or the Carrera S, same size, but the actual compressor wheel, the diameter, is what's changed between the two. So in the base car, it's a smaller compressor wheel, where in this car, it's larger. It's only like 3 or 4 mils, but that translates to more boost pressure. So in the base car, it's 13 PSI. In this, it's 16 PSI. Follow me? Now let's press on to some other things here. Now, the previous 991 had a dry sump system. This has a dry sump system. But again, you're adding a turbocharger, 2 turbochargers, and all of the plumbing that goes with it, so that increases the weight hanging off the rear. In total, it's about 17 kilograms. But what they've done is they found another area to pull some weight out of, and that's the dry sump. So that's been reduced 4.4 pounds. Then there is that all the plumbing for the air. That's all here. So think of it as, you know, I'm an old Pontiac guy. So think of this like a forced air induction system to get to those 2 turbos. Now that's getting the air in. What about getting the air out? You're probably familiar with the sport exhaust on many Porsches throughout the years. What they've done is they've changed the exhaust down here as well. So on the base car, there is basically a single exhaust on either side. On the Carrera, there's this, and then on either the Carrera or the Carrera S, you can do a sport exhaust, which now moves to the center here. Now that's all this and extra weight back here. How do we balance that out with driving dynamics? For that, we need to get another notebook out because there's even more changes there. Okay, so as if the engine wasn't confusing, this stuff gets even more confusing. So let's start with a little performance stuff. This one's a two-wheel drive. It's still on offer, two-wheel drive, all-wheel drive. But in the previous 991, the all-wheel drive was slower, obviously because it had a little extra weight. But really, the weight is about the same here. So it's anywhere between 3,150 pounds and probably about 3,300 pounds, depending on which version you get, all-wheel drive, two-wheel drive, what kind of roof. But the reality is there's more power back there. The weight really hasn't gone up, so the all-wheel drive is actually now a quicker car to 60 by about 0.2 of a second. The convertible is still probably one of the slowest ones. As an aside, me personally, I would want the Targa. Now, there's a couple of driving dynamics things that go into that. So the clutch, whether it's on the PDK or the manual, they've changed it so it has less vibration. Then the all-wheel drive system itself has different clutches, so it's able to get more power to the ground a bit faster, hence the faster all-wheel drive model. But then there are some other larger changes. So in previous years, you and I have joked around about the options game with Porsches and how they charge you for everything. Well, there's one option that is no longer available as an option. It's now fitted as standard, and that is PASM. So whether it's a Carrera or a Carrera S, there is now PASM, so you get the adjustable dampers. This one here is fitted with a further sport suspension, which is a standalone option. But to make things even more confusing, there is a sport package which is on offer in the Carrera S only. And that is probably one of the more interesting things that I would find here, because it packages three things. One of them, it changes the look of the mirror, which frankly I don't care about. Number two, Sport Chrono, which you and I have played around with before. Remember in the Porsche Boxster GTS, as well as some other cars, in that it does the, basically changes the engine mounts, and then it's got the timer up here. And that works in conjunction with PDK. Now, the thing about the Sport package that makes it more interesting than just Sport Chrono, four-wheel steering on a Porsche. Now, you and I have seen this trend as of late. We just drove that Audi Q7, a big, like, baby buggy SUV with four-wheel steering. Worked very well there, and I think it was more important on the Cadillac CT6 because you got that extra length of that vehicle. So those are big vehicles that get a lot of benefit in four-wheel steering, meaning it cuts the turning circle radius, the actual length of the turning circle radius, as well as makes it more stable at high speed. You get the same thing here. Frankly, you don't really see the benefit of the turning circle radius so much in a small car like this, but according to Porsche, it is 1.6 feet shorter. Now, full disclosure, we did not get a car with the four-wheel steering. I opted for one with a manual transmission. So we're going to come to you with a separate episode, hopefully on a Targa in a couple of months, that will have the four-wheel steering, which can be fitted as a standalone option. Now, that's probably the most exciting thing, at least to me, in terms of the changes, but there are some other things going on here. Number one, the dampers, the whole suspension, frankly, has been recalibrated, because think about this. Even though the integrated dry sump is 4.4 pounds lighter and the block is 3.3 pounds lighter, the overall extra weight hanging out over there is about 30 to 40 pounds more. So they've recalibrated the suspension to allow for the weight over there. And then number two, the rubber. It's frankly, there's just more rubber on the car. Like back here, this is the Carrera S. This one's up to 305s in the back on a Porsche. Now, there's a couple of other bits going on here, like the brakes. They're actually changed as well. Whether it's the Carrera or the Carrera S, the diameter has been increased. Like, for example, here it's 18% larger in the front. But more importantly, the caliper. So it's a 4-piston caliper on the Carrera and 6-piston up front on the Carrera S. So that's about everything driving dynamics. I'm going to spend a lot of time in the full first drive review going through each one of those bits. Sadly, not the four-wheel steering. Now with that, there's some changes that are technically not really Porsche and a Porsche, but are still rather important to us. Now, inside, it doesn't look a whole hell of a lot different, if I'm being honest. And that's to say a good thing, because over the years, I have ranted to you guys how much I prefer the aviation-inspired design here and all of the buttons over the integrated controllers you see in like Mercedes and BMWs and even Audis now. But really, there are two things going on here. Number one, the steering wheel. It looks like it's been pilfered from a 918 because it has. And then the other thing about that steering wheel, so if you can afford a car like this, and this is like north of 100 grand, you could probably afford a suit tailored directly to you at like Savile Row or in Italy. Well, Zuffenhausen does kind of the same thing here. So if you get that sport package, the one with the four-wheel steering I was telling you about, which I'm very excited to drive, the steering wheel changes from 375 mils on this to 360. It also gets like a knob off to the center of the hub there. It's kind of like that Ferrari button that they have on their steering wheels, if I'm being completely honest. And it has all the adjustment for the Sport Plus, which you no longer have here. Then I'd say more of a breakthrough. This is the first Porsche fitted with, are you ready for this? Apple CarPlay. So there's a couple things going on here. So you notice that screen there, it is flush with the dash. But really what's important here is not just the integration of Apple CarPlay, but what's going on behind the scenes here. And we will spend some time driving these on the Northern California roads, which is where Apple was born, and go through why this is so important and the impact it should have on other cars. Now we got to move on to like the more pedestrian things of the changes, and that has to go up front. So yes, you and I have gone through a laundry list of technical bits here, but the clinical term of what this is a mid-cycle refresh, or so the industry calls it. And Porsche, they're not immune to having to do a mid-cycle refresh. Me personally, I don't think they need to, but I guess they've done it anyway. And that means changing the front end, changing the back end a little bit, maybe tweaking the interior, which we've seen. So here, the front lights are a bit different, the front fascia is a bit different, depending on whether you go with a Carrera or a Carrera S, with a sport package, no sport package. This chin spoiler kind of changes. If I'm being brutally honest, there's a change back here which I'm not too fond of, and that is this air induction thing here, this rear grille kind of thing. Not loving this. I think there probably would have been a better way to do this, but then again, you guys know I'm a design freak. So with that, that is our entire tech review of the 2017 991, and they're calling it the .2. Don't love that name. So what I want to do now in advance of the full first drive review that's going to be coming up in a couple of days, I want to ask you guys a question. This is more of like a personal question because I don't really have a good answer to this. This is on offer, as we said, in two-wheel drive or all-wheel drive. I know if it were me, I would want a Targa, which would mean I would have to get the all-wheel drive because that's the only way it's on offer. But if I'm really coming up with a car or a Porsche that I would want, it would be a GT3 RS Targa with a manual transmission. But Zuffenhausen doesn't make that, sadly. So my question to you is this: what would you choose? Would you want a two-wheel drive or an all-wheel drive Porsche? And don't just tell me which one you would choose, but why you would choose it, what region of the world you come from, and most importantly, what Porsche you have owned or currently own. Let me know in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV all one word, MotoManTV all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, I want to leave you with two things. Number one, make sure you download our fancy new mobile application, which you can download for free at Apple iTunes or Google Play. And number two, a fun fact. So Ryan and I have been shooting up here in the beautiful California Redwoods. And as you've heard, it's very quiet up here. We've got this like nice backdrop of California Redwoods here. We've even got like this hollow tree over here, if you can see that too. But it was kind of eerie, if I'm being really honest, because when we were not shooting and I'm not blabbering to the camera, you can actually hear the trees talk. And I am not bullshitting you. And with that, until I see you in the full first drive review, Bish Beta.